Every empire needs a villain, not a cartoonish one, not a cinematic one, a real one. One who smiles at cameras, who talks about strength, who says, above all else, that he loves his country. But what if loving your country meant burning the world to keep it warm? For 70 years, the world operated on an assumption that America, however flawed, however self-interested, would remain the last guarantee of a global order, that its treaties meant something, that its word, however complicated, was its bond. That assumption died quietly, and loudly, and in broad daylight. What you are about to see is not a story about politics. It is a story about a man who spent his entire life treating the world as a transaction, and what happened when that man was handed the most powerful office on earth. Twice. His father told him, "Work hard, don't be weak, be a killer." He was a very good student. Roy Cohn, the man who taught a young Donald Trump everything worth knowing about power. Never admit wrongdoing, never. Counterattack, always harder than you were hit. And remember one rule above all others: life is transactional. There are no permanent allies, only permanent interests, only, "What can you do for me right now?" When the Department of Justice sued the Trump Organization in 1973 for systematically denying housing to black families, Cohn didn't advise retreat. He filed a $100 million countersuit against the federal government itself. It was dismissed. But that wasn't the point. The point was the signal. Come after me, and I will burn down the courtroom. For decades before politics, Trump had already built a masterclass in institutional destruction. He destroyed a professional football league, the USFL, not through incompetence, but through ambition unchecked by consequence. The jury awarded the winning side $3. He filed for bankruptcy 6 times and called it winning. He posed as his own spokesman, John Barron, lying to Forbes magazine to inflate his net worth and claim a prestige he had not earned. He defrauded over 6,000 students through a fake university that former employees testified was built on deception. And through all of it, he never admitted a single mistake. In 2015, something unprecedented happened. A man who had spent 50 years treating people as instruments for personal gain descended a golden escalator and told a nation that he was the answer. And half the country believed him. What the institutions did not understand, could not understand, is that he was not arriving to govern. He was arriving to win. And those are very different things. Every person who entered Trump's orbit learned the same lesson eventually. You were not a colleague, not an advisor, not a partner. You were useful until you weren't. Attorney General Jeff Sessions followed the law. He recused himself from the Russia investigation, as ethics required, as the law expected. Trump never forgave him. He was, in Trump's framing, the ultimate betrayal, a man who chose the rules over the ruler. This was the test. Sessions failed it by passing it. May 2017, FBI Director James Comey is fired. Officials warned Trump, this will look like a cover-up. This will trigger a special counsel. This will define your presidency. He fired Comey anyway, and later admitted, on camera, that he was thinking about the Russia thing. The warnings were correct. Robert Mueller was appointed within days, but here is what critics miss when they call these decisions failures. Trump did not believe in institutions enough to fear their consequences. He was not playing chess, he was flipping the board. Vice President Mike Pence told him directly, "I do not have the power to reject the electoral votes." Trump ignored it. He pressured state officials to find votes. He urged a crowd of tens of thousands to fight like hell. And then he watched. 5 people died that day. 140 police officers were injured. The Capitol, the symbol of the world's most powerful democracy, was breached for the first time since the British burned it in 1814. Historians called it a self-coup, an attempt by a sitting president to remain in power through force rather than law. And the most chilling part? It was not the end. It was a preview. In 2024, a Manhattan jury delivered a verdict that no American court had ever delivered before. 34 felony counts, falsifying business records, concealing payments to silence a woman whose story, if told, might have cost him an election. He was the first former president in American history convicted of criminal charges. And then, 6 months later, he was elected again. That detail is not incidental to this story. It is the story. He stood at the podium on January 20th, 2025, and made a promise. He called it retribution. He demanded at the Department of Justice full and complete accountability for those who had investigated him, people he called scum. Bad people. He did not speak like a man who had just won an election. He spoke like a man who had been wronged and had been waiting with extraordinary patience to make it right. What followed was the most rapid institutional dismantling in modern American history. In a single purge, 17 independent inspectors general were fired. These were the people Congress relied upon to watch trillions of dollars in federal spending. The eyes and ears of accountability, appointed specifically to be immune to political pressure. Gone. Overnight. 30,000 career federal employees, experts in law, science, medicine, intelligence, were terminated or had their civil service protections stripped away. They were replaced by people whose primary qualification was loyalty. Critics called it hollowing out. Legal experts called it an affront to post-Watergate norms. But in Trump's worldview, it had a simpler name: winning. In 2025, the Trump administration dropped a federal corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Not because new evidence emerged, not because the case was weak, because Adams, critics argued, had agreed to assist with Trump's deportation agenda. A conservative acting U.S. attorney, Danielle Sassoon, a Federalist Society member, no liberal, resigned in protest. She wrote that she could not, in good faith, defend the dismissal, that this is not how criminal law should be used. Career prosecutors walked out, a mass exodus, because they understood what it meant, that the rule of law, the idea that no one is above prosecution, had been replaced with something older, something darker, favor. If you cannot punish your enemies through law, control the lawyers. In 2025, executive orders targeted law firms that had litigated against Trump, revoking their security clearances, canceling their government contracts, threatening their ability to practice. Critics used a specific word for it. Not political pressure, not policy disagreement, mob-style intimidation. Elite firms, firms that had spent decades defending the rights of the powerless and the wrongly accused, capitulated one by one, because the alternative was financial ruin. The legal profession, the last structural barrier between a citizen and the state, had been made to flinch. While the attention was on the purges and the power plays, a piece of legislation moved quietly through Congress. They called it the One Big Beautiful Bill. The Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan institution, ran the numbers. 11.8 million people would lose Medicaid coverage. 3 million would lose food assistance. The deficit would expand by $3.4 trillion by 2034. The bill's largest benefits, critics argued, flowed to the highest income earners, while costing the lowest earners roughly $1,600 a year. It passed, and it was called, by its own architects, beautiful. For decades, Trump had told anyone who would listen that the world was systematically ripping off the United States. Japan, Germany, Saudi Arabia, the entire architecture of global trade, treaties negotiated over generations, was, in his telling, a theft. In his second term, he acted on it. Tariffs were imposed at levels not seen since the 1930 Smoot-Hawley Act. the protectionist policy that economists credit with deepening the Great Depression. Markets went into freefall. A new Wall Street trend emerged. Analysts called it "Sell America." Foreign investors, for the first time in living memory, began asking whether American assets could be trusted as a safe haven. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled the tariffs illegal, an overreach of executive authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. But by then, the damage to relationships, to trust, to the global order was already done. You cannot unsend the signal that America's word can change overnight. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, had 14,000 employees working across the globe, providing medicine to children dying of preventable diseases, food to communities on the edge of famine, stability programs in countries teetering between democracy and collapse. Using the newly created Department of Government Efficiency, Trump reduced that workforce by 98%. 14,000 people, down to fewer than 300. Overnight global aid programs worth billions of dollars came to, in the words of those on the ground, a dead stop. Critics did not call it a budget cut. They called it something more deliberate, a demonstration execution, an act of destruction designed to terrify every other federal agency into submission. The soft power America had spent 70 years building, the belief that American presence meant safety, not just military might, was gone, replaced by a vacuum, and vacuums do not stay empty for long. In January 2026, Operation Metro Surge brought the tactics of foreign policy home, a massive immigration enforcement crackdown, bypassing traditional due process, moving fast, moving hard, moving in a way that did not pause to ask, "Are you a citizen?" Federal agents killed American citizens. Courts issued orders to stop the summary deportations. The administration ignored them. Federal judges found probable cause that the administration was in criminal contempt of court. National shutdowns, a term not used in America since the civil rights era, began. And across the country, in cities that had once felt safe, people began asking a question that should never have to be asked in a constitutional democracy. Am I next? His father told him to be a killer. Roy Cohn taught him that life is transactional, that loyalty is currency and institutions are obstacles. And Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, applied those lessons with remarkable consistency. To football leagues, to contractors, to universities, to the FBI, to his own vice president, to the rule of law, to the global order itself. Critics say the damage is not simply political, it is structural. When you remove the watchdogs, the expertise does not come back easily. When you weaponize the courts, even once, the fear does not dissipate when the administration changes. When you tell the world that America's promises are conditional, that they last only as long as the current occupant of the Oval Office finds them convenient, allies recalculate, and they do not recalculate in your favor. The question historians will debate for generations is not whether the damage was real. The question is whether it was the point, whether the chaos was the product, not the side effect. Whether a man who spent 50 years winning by making others lose had simply, finally, found a theater large enough for his ambitions. We are living in that theater now. The curtain has not come down.